They called him Babyface, the youngest, smallest recruit in Delta Company. During chow time, seasoned soldiers would joke about how he'd probably cry for his mother during the first firefight. None of them knew that this quiet 18-year-old had already survived 3 classified missions in places that don't exist on any map. Until the night everything changed. Welcome to the Human Stories. Before we continue this incredible story, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support our channel. We're growing every day, and I genuinely appreciate you being part of this journey. Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Week 6 of basic training. The mess hall at Fort Bragg buzzed with the usual dinner conversation. Tired recruits complaining about drill sergeants, comparing blisters, and trying to predict who'd wash out next. At table 7, Specialist Rodriguez was holding court, regaling his audience with exaggerated tales of his civilian conquests. "I'm telling you guys," Rodriguez said, stabbing his mashed potatoes with unnecessary force. "Basic training is just summer camp compared to real combat. Half these kids wouldn't last 5 minutes in actual warfare." His eyes drifted to the corner table, where a solitary figure sat quietly eating, barely visible behind a tray piled higher than seemed possible for someone his size. The recruit looked like he belonged in a high school cafeteria, not a military installation. "Take Babyface over there," Rodriguez continued, his voice carrying across the mess hall. "Kid looks like he needs a permission slip from his mom just to be here. Probably still sleeps with a nightlight." The comment drew snickers from the surrounding tables. Private Marcus Chun didn't look up from his meal. At 18, he was indeed the youngest recruit in Delta Company, with a slight build that made his uniform appear perpetually oversized. His face retained the soft features of adolescence, and when he spoke, which wasn't often, his voice carried a quiet, almost apologetic tone. "Seriously though," continued Private Jackson, Rodriguez's closest friend, "how did someone like that even make it through the recruiters? He looks like a strong wind could knock him over." Chun methodically finished his dinner, cleared his tray, and walked past their table without acknowledgement. As he passed, Rodriguez called out loud enough for half the mess hall to hear. "Hey Babyface, you sure you're in the right place? The Boy Scout camp is about 50 miles north." A few recruits laughed nervously. Others looked uncomfortable with the obvious bullying, but nobody intervened. In the rigid hierarchy of military training, speaking out of turn could mean extra PT for everyone. Chun paused briefly, his hand tightening almost imperceptibly on his empty tray. For just a moment, something flickered across his features. Not hurt or embarrassment, but something deeper, more calculating. Then it was gone, replaced by the same mild expression he always wore. "Yes, sir," he said quietly, and continued walking. Rodriguez shook his head in disgust. "Kid's gonna get himself killed the first time we see real action. Mark my words." What Rodriguez didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Marcus Chun had already seen more real action than most soldiers would experience in an entire career. The baby-faced recruit had been conducting classified operations since he was 16, when a computer programming competition had caught the attention of certain government agencies who specialized in finding exceptional individuals. Chen's youthful appearance, combined with his fluency in Mandarin, Korean, and 3 other languages, made him invaluable for operations requiring someone who could blend into civilian populations in East Asia. While his peers were worrying about prom dates and college applications, Chun was infiltrating human trafficking networks in Southeast Asia, gathering intelligence on nuclear proliferation in North Korea, and disrupting cyber attacks that could have crippled American infrastructure. But those missions were classified at levels that officially didn't exist, conducted by units that had no names, in service of objectives that would never be acknowledged. As far as the world was concerned, Marcus Chun was just another teenager who'd enlisted after high school. The attack, 0247 hours, the first explosion, shattered the pre-dawn quiet like a thunderclap. Chun was already awake. Old habits from previous deployments made deep sleep impossible. When the mortar rounds began falling on the outer perimeter of Fort Bragg. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon for more incredible stories of hidden heroes. And tell us in the comments, have you ever met someone who turned out to be completely different from what they first appeared? Share your story below. Emergency klaxons wailed as the base shifted into high alert. In the barracks, confused recruits stumbled around in the darkness, trying to process what was happening. This wasn't supposed to be part of basic training. What the hell is going on? Rodriguez shouted, struggling to put on his gear in the chaos. Drill Sergeant Martinez said this was a real attack, Jackson called back, his voice cracking with stress. Some kind of coordinated assault on multiple military bases across the southeast. Through the small barracks windows, they could see muzzle flashes in the tree line beyond the training grounds. This wasn't an exercise. Insurgents had somehow penetrated one of the most secure military installations in the country. Everyone gear up and move to the armory. Drill Sergeant Martinez burst through the barracks door, his usual composure replaced by urgent professionalism. This is not a drill. We have hostile forces on the base perimeter. The recruits scrambled to follow orders, but their movements were clumsy, panicked. These were soldiers in training, not combat veterans. Most had never heard a shot fired in anger, let alone faced an organized enemy assault. Chun, however, moved with quiet efficiency. While others fumbled with their equipment, he was already fully geared and checking his weapon with practiced precision. His movements were economical, purposeful, the result of muscle memory developed in situations far more dangerous than this. Babyface. Rodriguez grabbed Chen's arm as they rushed toward the armory. Stay close to me, kid. I know you're scared, but I'll keep you safe. Chen looked at him with an expression Rodriguez couldn't quite read. Thank you, he said simply. But Chen wasn't scared. He was calculating. His mind was already processing the tactical situation. The sound patterns of the explosions, the direction of incoming fire, the likely number and positioning of attackers, based on the coordination of their assault. This wasn't random terrorism. This was a well-planned military operation. At the armory, chaos reigned. Drill sergeants were trying to organize defensive positions, while confused recruits struggled with equipment they'd only used in training scenarios. The attack was coordinated and sophisticated, too sophisticated for random insurgents. Sir, Private Williams, one of the communication specialists, ran up to Drill Sergeant Martinez. Radio contact with command is sporadic. They're hitting multiple positions simultaneously, and they're jamming our communications. Martinez's face darkened. How many hostiles are we talking about? Unknown, sir. But they've breached the eastern perimeter and are advancing on the main training facilities. Through the armory windows, they could see tracer rounds lighting up the darkness. The attackers were using military-grade equipment and moving with tactical precision. This wasn't a random assault. It was a coordinated attack designed to test American military response capabilities. Chen observed the confusion around him and made a decision. He approached Drill Sergeant Martinez, who was frantically trying to coordinate with other units via radio. Sergeant Martinez, Chen said quietly. Not now, Chen. Martinez snapped, then caught himself. Even in crisis, he tried to maintain professionalism with his recruits. What is it? The communication jamming pattern suggests they're using Chinese-manufactured equipment, specifically the Type 863 system. If you adjust your radio frequency to 142.7 MHz and use burst transmission protocols, you can punch through their jamming. Martinez stared at him. How the hell do you know that? Before Chen could answer, another explosion rocked the building. Through the windows, they could see armed figures moving through the darkness with night vision equipment and coordinated tactics. Sir, Chen continued, his voice remaining calm despite the chaos around them, they're advancing in a classic three-pronged assault pattern. They'll hit the main barracks first, then move on the armory and communications center. If you position your people here and here, he pointed to specific locations on the wall map, you can create overlapping fields of fire that will channel them into a kill zone. Martinez looked at the young recruit, as if seeing him for the first time. The tactical assessment was sophisticated, professional, the kind of analysis that came from advanced military training and real combat experience. Chun, where did you learn? Contact front, someone shouted from the window. Armed figures in dark tactical gear were approaching the armory building. What happened next would be burned into the memory of every recruit who witnessed it. Chun moved to the window with fluid precision, his weapon coming up in a smooth, practiced motion. While other recruits were still trying to figure out how to safely remove their safeties, Chun was already acquiring targets. His first shot took down the lead attacker at 200 meters, a difficult shot under normal circumstances, nearly impossible in darkness and stress for an inexperienced shooter. His second and third shots eliminated two more hostiles who were flanking around the building's east side. Jesus Christ, Rodriguez whispered, watching in amazement. Babyface, how are you? Chun was no longer the quiet, awkward recruit they knew. He moved with the confidence of someone who had done this many times before. His shooting was precise and economical. Each shot carefully aimed, each target neutralized with minimal ammunition expenditure. Martinez, Chen said without taking his eyes off the window, you need to get these recruits to the secondary defensive position. This building is going to be overrun in the next 5 minutes. How can you know that? Because I've seen this attack pattern before. Chen's voice carried an authority that none of them had ever heard from him. This is a probe. They're testing response times and defensive capabilities. The real assault comes after they map our positions. As if to confirm his words, the initial wave of attackers suddenly withdrew, disappearing back into the darkness. They're regrouping, Chen continued. You have maybe 10 minutes before they come back with heavier weapons and better positioning. Martinez stared at the young recruit, who was somehow directing a defensive operation with the skill of a seasoned officer. Private Chen, I need to know right now. What aren't you telling us? Chen turned from the window, and for the first time since the attack began, his carefully maintained cover started to crack. The mild-mannered teenager was gone, replaced by someone with eyes that held depths of experience that shouldn't have been possible at his age. Sergeant, with respect, that information is classified above your clearance level. The statement hung in the air like a bomb. A recruit doesn't tell a drill sergeant that information is above his clearance level. A recruit doesn't have access to classified information at all. Who are you? Martinez asked quietly. Before Chen could answer, the second wave of the attack began. This time, the insurgents came with RPGs and coordinated fire teams. The armory building shook under sustained assault. Everyone down, Chen shouted, and his voice carried the unmistakable tone of command. Without thinking, the other recruits obeyed, including Rodriguez, who found himself taking orders from the kid he'd been mocking hours earlier. Chen moved through the chaos with purpose, directing defensive fire and calling out enemy positions with uncanny accuracy. He seemed to anticipate the attackers' movements, countering their tactics before they could implement them. Flanking team moving up the north side, he called out calmly. Williams, Jackson, shift your fire to cover that approach. How can you see them? Williams shouted back over the gunfire. Experience, Chen replied, then added quietly. More than I should have at my age. For the next 30 minutes, the small group of recruits held off a coordinated assault by experienced fighters. But it wasn't the recruits who were directing the defense. It was Marcus Chen, the quiet teenager they'd dismissed as too young and too weak for military service. When reinforcements finally arrived and the attack was repelled, the aftermath revealed something extraordinary. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned, the recruits had suffered no casualties. The attackers, however, had taken significant losses that could only have resulted from expert defensive tactics and precise marksmanship. The revelation in the debriefing room 3 hours later, Colonel Harrison reviewed the after-action reports with growing amazement. A group of basic training recruits had successfully defended against a professional military assault. It should have been impossible. Sergeant Martinez, Colonel Harrison said, your report indicates that one of your recruits took tactical command during the engagement. A Private Marcus Chen. Yes, sir. The kid knew things he shouldn't have known. Spoke like he'd done this before. Colonel Harrison nodded slowly. He'd spent the last hour on secure phone calls with people whose names didn't appear on any organizational chart. The conversation had been enlightening. Send Private Chen to my office. When Chen entered the colonel's office, he moved with the same quiet confidence he'd displayed during the attack. Gone was any pretense of being just another confused recruit. Private Chen, Colonel Harrison said carefully, I've had some very interesting conversations about you in the last hour. Conversations with people who officially don't exist, about operations that never happened. Chen stood at attention, his expression neutral. Yes, sir. According to my sources, you've been conducting classified operations for the past 2 years. Operations involving cybersecurity, intelligence gathering, and what one person very carefully described as specialized problem-solving in denied areas. I cannot confirm or deny any classified activities, sir. Colonel Harrison leaned back in his chair. Private Chen, you're 18 years old. How is any of this possible? For the first time since entering the office, Chen's professional composure softened slightly. Sir, some people are identified early for their potential value to national security. My language skills and technical abilities made me useful for certain types of missions that required someone who could blend into civilian populations. Missions in places that don't exist on any map. Something like that, sir. Colonel Harrison studied the young man in front of him. And now you're here, in basic training, pretending to be just another recruit. The cover was necessary, sir. My previous handlers felt that official military training would provide better preparation for future operations. It also creates a more legitimate military record for operational security purposes. So everything, the shy demeanor, the poor physical performance, the hesitant responses, all of it was an act. Chen considered the question carefully. Not entirely, sir. I am 18. I do lack traditional military experience and formal combat training. The operations I've conducted were different. Tonight was actually the first time I'd engaged in conventional military tactics. And yet you directed that defense like a veteran officer. I learn quickly, sir. Colonel Harrison shook his head in amazement. Private Chen, what happens now? That depends on my handlers, sir. I suspect they'll want to debrief tonight's action and determine whether my cover has been compromised beyond repair. As if summoned by his words, Colonel Harrison's secure phone rang. After a brief conversation filled with military jargon and coded references, he hung up. Private Chen, you're being transferred effective immediately. Your basic training is being expedited. Yes, sir. Before you go, I have one question. Those other recruits, Rodriguez, Jackson, the others who gave you a hard time, do they know? Chun smiled slightly, the first genuine expression Colonel Harrison had seen from him. They know something, sir. But the official record will show that Drill Sergeant Martinez directed the successful defense. The recruits performed admirably under his leadership. And your role? I was just another scared recruit who got lucky with a few good shots. The mess hall. 3 days later, the atmosphere in the mess hall had changed. Word had spread about the attack and the successful defense, though the details remained classified. What the recruits knew was that they had survived something extraordinary, and their perspective on basic training, and each other, had shifted dramatically. Rodriguez sat at the same table where he'd mocked Chen just days earlier. This time, his conversation was different. I keep thinking about that night, he said quietly to Jackson. The way Babyface moved, the things he knew. It was like watching someone else entirely. Jackson nodded. Did you see his shooting? I've been in training for 3 months, and I couldn't make those shots on a clear day with perfect conditions. He was doing it in the dark, under fire. At his usual corner table, Chen sat quietly eating, looking once again like the mild-mannered teenager they'd first met. But now the other recruits watched him with different eyes. The mockery had been replaced by curiosity, respect, and perhaps a little fear. You think he's some kind of special forces? Williams asked, keeping his voice low. Special forces doesn't recruit 18-year-olds, Rodriguez replied. But something's not right. Or maybe something's more right than we realized. Chen finished his meal and approached their table. The conversation stopped immediately. Rodriguez, Chen said quietly, could I speak with you for a moment? Rodriguez nodded, following Chen to a quiet corner of the mess hall. I wanted to thank you, Chen said. Thank me? For what? For offering to keep me safe during the attack. You didn't have to do that. Rodriguez looked uncomfortable. Listen, Babyface. Chen, I'm sorry about all the stuff I said before. The jokes, the teasing. After what happened. Chen held up a hand. You don't need to apologize. You were looking out for what you thought was a scared kid. That's exactly what a good soldier should do. But you weren't scared, were you? Chen was quiet for a moment. I was scared, he said finally. Just not of the same things you were scared of. What do you mean? You were scared of getting hurt, of not measuring up, of failing your fellow soldiers. Those are normal fears. I was scared of revealing too much, of compromising operations you'll never hear about, of failing people whose names I can't tell you. Rodriguez stared at him. Who are you really? Chen smiled. The same quiet, slightly apologetic smile he'd always worn. I'm an 18-year-old kid who enlisted in the army and ended up in Delta Company for basic training. Everything else is just details. Before Rodriguez could respond, Chen was walking away, once again blending into the background like he always had. Epilogue. 6 months later. Later, Private Marcus Chen graduated from basic training with completely unremarkable scores. Average physical fitness, adequate marksmanship, satisfactory leadership potential. His official records showed nothing that would distinguish him from thousands of other young soldiers entering the army. Rodriguez, Jackson, and the other recruits who had witnessed that night sometimes talked about what they'd seen. But without official confirmation, their stories sounded like the kind of exaggerated tales soldiers always told. Over time, the details became fuzzy, the memories less certain. Chen was transferred to a communications unit where he worked quietly and efficiently, maintaining his cover as just another soldier with good technical skills. His superiors noted that he was reliable and competent, but nothing special. What they didn't know was that Chun continued to conduct the same classified operations he'd been running since he was 16. His military service provided perfect cover for traveling to locations around the world where a young American soldier might reasonably be stationed. Sometimes, late at night in whatever barracks or safe house he was occupying, Chun would think about that attack on Fort Bragg. It was the first and only time his two worlds had collided. The official world where he was just another young recruit, and the shadow world where he was something else entirely. He'd saved the lives of soldiers who had mocked him, directed a successful defense while maintaining his cover, and walked away with his secret intact. It was exactly the kind of operation his handlers valued most: successful mission completion with zero compromise of operational security. But Chun knew that Rodriguez and the others would always wonder. They would always remember the night when Baby Face had revealed himself to be something more than he appeared. And maybe that was okay. Maybe some secrets were meant to be partially revealed, if only to remind people that the world was more complex than it seemed. In mess halls and barracks around the world, soldiers told stories about the battles they'd fought and the heroes they'd known. Most of those stories grew larger with each telling, becoming legends that bore little resemblance to the truth. But sometimes, just sometimes, the truth was more extraordinary than any legend. And sometimes the greatest heroes were the ones who made sure their heroism remained a secret, protecting not just national security, but the illusion that heroes always looked like what people expected them to look like. Marcus Chun continued his work, whatever that work truly was, carrying the secret of who he really was in a world that needed heroes but could never know their names. After all, the most effective soldiers were often the ones nobody suspected of being soldiers at all.